Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. I think we should start now. Yeah, you're joined today by a few of us who work in the education sector, here to answer any questions that you have. So thank you very much for the Q&As that we've had in advance. I'll dive straight in, and the first question we've had today is about the new procurement bill. So I'm going to hand over to my lovely colleague Gemma, who's going to talk you through that. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm jumping between three screens. I'm useless at technology. Honestly, terrible. Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to see you. I do apologise. I'm a little bit snotty. I've got a bit of a cold. So please do bear with me while I'm talking to you. Okay, so with regards to the new Procurement Act, there's been quite a lot of questions around this because it's been a long time coming, effectively. And people are wondering how it's going to change and the impact. At the moment, as you know, the situation is that even though we are now no longer in the EU, effectively we introduced legislation, so the UK GDPR and the Data Protection Act, which effectively kind of mirrors the European stuff anyway, obviously because we still want to keep our foot in the door and we still want to make sure that we're compliant. So there are those rules there, but this new procurement bill is going to be changing things and things like that. So the Procurement Act 2023 is due to go live on the 28th of October, as you might be aware. And as I say, it's we've kept very similar to the EU regulations and rules with regards to it. The aim of the Act is to increase transparency, to simplify the bidding process and try and ensure a fair distribution of public contracts. It's about trying to open up the market to more people, make it more even and more competitive. The idea behind it is that they're going to streamline the procedures, so they're going to try and reduce the complexity in the procurement process, to try and lower barriers for the smaller businesses, because at the moment it is, as you probably know, procurement is very, very complex. There's lots of different options that you can use when tendering, and it's a difficult process. It's got lots of steps to it, and there's all different options for how you can do it and why you would do it under the current legislation. So it's about trying to streamline those procedures, and it's about making sure that we can make it open to those smaller businesses. It's also focusing on transparency and fairness. So it's making sure that there's an increased visibility of opportunities for businesses, because a lot of the time, you know, people say, oh, I didn't know about that, or I didn't know about this. And there's that many frameworks and things about. So it's about making sure that that visibility of opportunities is improved. And it's also about, again, ensuring that all businesses have that equal access to public sector contracts. So it's about giving everybody a chance. It's also about supporting for innovation. So again, it's focusing more now this time on innovative solutions. And again, that is about bringing in small businesses that may have those innovative solutions. So it's going to be interesting, I think, is the answer. That we've read through all the papers, and it is a complex bless you. So it's about trying basically to simplify, make it more transparent, and also make it better for smaller businesses to be able to get involved in the procurement process. That's just a bit of an overview. Obviously, if anybody has sort of more drilled down specific questions, please do feel free to email or call me anytime. But that's just a bit of a basic overview. So streamlining, transparency and innovation, and making sure that it's fairer for the market.
Oh, you've just gone on mute there, Gemma, but I don't know if that was because you'd finished.
Yes, I finished. I was just saying thank you for my brew to my colleagues.
Oh, right.
Cheers, everybody. Cheers, everyone. Good morning. It's honey with caffeine.
Thank you. Lots to think about there with procurement. But like Gemma says, if anyone's got any questions, then send those over to us and we'll be happy to help. So moving on then, the next question we've had is an employment-based staffing question, which relates to the upcoming potential change in government. So the question is, do you see any HR changes with a change in government? So I'm going to hand over to Kat here to talk you through those potential changes.
Thanks, Laura. Yes, so with the question that's been posed, I assume that the the person who's asked it is referring to, I suppose, the opinion polls that are suggesting that there may very well be a change in government on the 4th of July and that Labour may be elected. So I've kind of gone on that basis. But, you know, all the parties have put forward their various manifestos. They all contain provisions with regards to employment law and HR changes that they plan to make if elected or re-elected. And of course, we don't know what's going to happen on the 4th of July, but I will just focus upon what Labour are saying, because they do propose some quite radical changes to employment law and HR. So I'll focus on that, but just be aware, we have done a podcast about what the other manifestos say as well, so you can access that from our website. So have a listen to that if you are interested. So Labour have already kind of set their stall out with regards to employment law changes. They've previously produced what's called an employment rights green paper, which was called a New Deal for Working People, where they set out what they would propose to do if they were elected. And then they followed this up with Labour's plan to make work pay, delivering a New Deal for Working People document. They, of course, also have produced their manifesto. And within this, they make a clear commitment to say, they effectively say, look, we've already set out our stall with regards to what we're going to do for employment rights, and particularly refer to these New Deal documents. So we've already had a bit of an idea of what's on the horizon if they are elected. But what is striking in the manifesto is that within it, on the first page, they have what's called Labour's first steps of what they would do if they were elected, the first things they would do. And within that, there's a clear commitment that they're going to recruit 6,500 new teachers, in quoting here, in key subjects to set children up for life, work and the future. And they would fund this by ending tax breaks for private schools, which I know was there's been a lot of headlines about this proposal. So that's within their first steps. So that's a really clear commitment from Labour. If they are elected, that's what they plan to do. And they also plan to open up 3,000 nurseries, and they're going to do this through upgrading space in primary schools, along with a pledge to update the early career framework and ensure that every new teacher entering the classroom has or is working towards qualified teacher status. They also plan to reinstate the school support staff negotiating body to help address, and I quote here, the acute recruitment and retention crisis in support roles. And a new excellence in leadership programme will be implemented where there's going to be regional improvement teams where school-to-school support is going to be enhanced and best practice. They also plan to change the inspection system, so there's going to be a new kind of report card system rather than a single grade. And there's going to be a well publicised plan for free breakfast clubs in every primary school, which is going to be accessible to all children, and also a proposal to limit the number of branded items of uniform and PE kit that schools can require. Within the manifesto, they also deal with further and higher education, kind of what their plans would be if they were elected. They plan to guarantee training and apprenticeship or help to find work for all 18 to 21-year-olds. And they're going to establish Skills England to bring together businesses, training providers and unions with national and local government to ensure, and I'm quoting here, that we have highly trained workforce needed to deliver Labour's industrial strategy. With further education colleges, they plan to transform these into technical excellence colleges. And the plan being that these colleges will work with businesses, trade unions and local government to provide young people with better job opportunities and create the highly trained workforce that local economies need. There's also a commitment to support children to study creative or vocational subjects until they're 16 and ensure more children are active by protecting time for PE. So within the manifesto, there are a lot of commitments with regards to education. I know that I was listening on the radio this morning and they were asking about universities and kind of, you know, where if there's going to be more funding available. That depth of detail is not in the manifesto, but it's certainly something that voters are asking questions about. So it'll be interesting to see what happens after the election if Labour are elected. There are some other changes as well that I kind of wanted to highlight, because there are some quite interesting employment law reforms that Labour proposed to make, which you would need to be aware of with when you're managing staff, etc. And the first thing that really does grab the headlines is that Labour proposed to introduce day one rights for sick pay, parental leave and unfair dismissal. Now, the day one right for unfair dismissal is really significant for institutions, because that's going to give a lot of people a lot more rights pretty quickly. Although Labour have indicated that actually a fair dismissal may include a dismissal in a probation period. So I think one takeaway would be that if Labour are elected, you need to make sure that you do have probation periods in place, that you manage those probation periods, and if someone isn't fit for your institution, that you follow a fair process, because people are going to have those day one rights. There's a plan to extend the employment tribunal time limits for bringing a claim from 3 months to 6 months. So giving people more time to lodge claims, and also a plan to move towards a single status of worker and transition towards what Labour describe as a simpler two-part framework for employment status. So simply just having self-employed and workers. At the moment, we have self-employed, workers and employees. Now, there's a commitment to consult on this to kind of look at the detail about creating this simpler framework, because actually, you know, this is very confusing, and this has been something that the current government have looked at to try and make simpler, but haven't kind of really got anywhere with it. And it was the Taylor Review back in 2017 that kind of said, look, we need to deal with this. So you can see it's not really progressed more in that time. And we have had COVID, of course, which has delayed things slightly, but it certainly won't be straightforward, but that's kind of what Labour proposed to do. There's also a plan to alter the criteria for determining national minimum wage, so that all adults are entitled to the same minimum wage. There aren't those age bands, and the rate of the national minimum wage would include a consideration of the cost of living. So that certainly will have an impact for quite a lot of our clients that pay on or around the national minimum wage. Labour plan also to require employers with more than 250 employees to have a menopause action plan. And they would also change collective redundancy consultation requirements, so they're based on the number of redundancies across the whole business rather than at each establishment as the law currently is. There's a plan to ban what they call exploitative zero-hour contracts. We're not quite sure what exploitative means. And there will also be a right for employees to have a contract that reflects the hours they regularly work based on a 12-week reference period, so protect those people who are on zero-hours contracts. There's a really interesting proposal as well, where employees will be given the right to switch off or disconnect. And that would mean that employers effectively can't contact employees outside of working hours. Now, this is something that's already in place in countries such as France, Belgium and Ireland. So it will be quite interesting to see kind of what that looks like, but just be aware of that. Unsurprisingly, trade union rights will be strengthened under a Labour government to make it easier for trade unions to enter the workplace to organise, meet and represent the members, and also simplify the recognition process. There's also a proposal to place a proactive duty on employers to inform all new employees of their right to join a union, and keep informing them of this on a regular basis. And also there's a proposal to make it easier for workers to raise collective grievances through ACAS. Now, there had been talk about fair pay agreements being implemented across all sectors. Labour have kind of stepped back from that now and said there's only proposal for a fair pay agreement in adult social care, so not across all sectors. Interestingly as well, they also plan to replace the apprenticeship levy, which is currently in place, with a flexible growth and skills levy, with Skills England consulting on eligible courses to ensure qualifications offer value for money. And they also plan to introduce a landmark Race Equality Act if elected. Now, just following on from this, we have had queries about, well, you know, if Labour are elected on the 4th of July, does that mean that all of these things are kind of going to come into force, you know, on the day after? Do we need to kind of get things ready to go now? Now, what I would say is that in the manifesto, Labour have committed to introducing legislation to implement these changes within 100 days of them winning a general election. So within 100 days, they say they're going to introduce legislation. However, throughout the manifesto, Labour say consistently they're going to consult on proposals, because I think businesses were quite concerned that there are some quite radical changes here, and that if they're implemented straight away, you know, they need to be thought through properly. So I think what would happen is if there is a legislation put before Parliament with 100 days, as Labour have committed to do, it may very well be draft legislation. which would obviously form part of that consultation that they've promised. Some of the reforms have been debated for years. So, for example, the plan to create a single enforcement body to ensure the national minimum wage is paid, that's kind of something that has been consulted on previously. So that could be acted on pretty quickly. And of course, if there is substantial secondary legislation required, Labour says that they will engage with expert stakeholders, including employers and trade unions as well. So I think with regards to if it's going to happen quickly, I think that there is going to be some consultation on this. It certainly won't be rushed through. Looking at the changes to the qualifying period in order to bring a claim for unfair dismissal, that a lot of institutions are kind of thinking, my goodness, that's going to give a lot of people a lot of rights very quickly. There have been changes to this qualifying period in order to bring a claim for unfair dismissal. And previously it was 6 months. It's changed, and it was 1 year, and now it's currently 2 years. The most recent change was in 2012, where the qualifying period of continuous employment for unfair dismissal rights was increased from 1 year to 2 years. So that was in 2012 when it went up to 2 years. So I kind of had a look to see what the process was, how they did it then, as to kind of what they would need to potentially do now. So they made an order. So it was they made Article 3 of the Unfair Dismissal Statement of Reasons for Dismissal Variation of Qualifying Period Order in 2012, bit of a mouthful. The order was made on the 30th of March 2012, and it came into force on the 6th of April 2012. So it was pretty quick. But I think what is worth remembering is that when this did happen, there were transitional provisions in place. So it was just employees whose employment started after that date. It wasn't for current employees. So it may be in this case, if there is a change, there are those transitional provisions in place as well. So I think, it could go through pretty quickly. Any order would need to be approved by Parliament as well. So we need to think about that. Of course, they've got summer recesses, etc., things like that. But I think, there is going to be consultation on this because it is quite a big change. So I don't think it would happen immediately, but uncharted territory at the moment.
Thank you. It's really interesting, isn't it, that some of those things, like you say, have been talked about for quite a long time. So we'll see if they actually come to fruition. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, so you can tell from that Kat's our expert on them, and probably is very glad to not read another manifesto for a while. But yeah, lots to keep us busy, I think, and to keep you guys busy in schools as well after the election. Okay, so the next question we've had is another one for us, actually. So I'll take that one. And we've been asked in a scenario where there's a tightening budget, which I know is affecting a lot of people at the moment. If a member of staff is on a fixed term contract, which has been renewed for the past 2 years, can you end the contract at the end of the school year? So there's a number of things to think about there. I think before we get into the detail of it, it's worth remembering, what is the reason why it's been renewed for the past 2 years? Because quite often with fixed term contracts, how you proceed with them will depend upon whether they really are genuine fixed term contracts, because unfortunately sometimes they can be labelled as such, but they might actually not be. So it's important to think about, is it linked to, for example, covering somebody who is absent? So for example, a maternity leave contract, is it to do with a particular project? And the more specific it is in relation to a type of work or a project or a type of funding, then the better really for the employer in terms of what they can do. Because you have to remember that the ending of a fixed term contract, or not renewing it in this case, that will amount to a dismissal according to the Employment Rights Act. So obviously, if you've got a dismissal, you then need to make sure you've got a fair reason for that dismissal. And particularly in this scenario, it's been renewed for the past 2 years. So the person in question who's under this contract, the employee, is going to have rights to potentially challenge that dismissal if they think it's not fair, because they are protected from an unfair dismissal point of view. And as I say, that non-renewal will amount to a dismissal. So in terms of what you can do, if you are satisfied that there is a reason that it can't be renewed, and obviously here the person has suggested that it might be to do with the budget, so a financial issue, you need to think about how you then go through that process. So I would say you would start with Looking at the contract itself, what does the contract say about when it's due to end? Some fixed term contracts will say that from the outset, they will have a specific end date. In this scenario, even if that was the case, it looks like then there's been renewal letters. So the original contract, the end date in that might not be relevant any longer. But what you will have to look at is whether there are any other notice provisions within that contract. And if there are, obviously you need to abide by those. So then after that, after you've looked at what the contract says, we would advise that you then write to the employee. You would tell them the date on which the fixed term contract is due to end, and also give them a reason for why that's ending, and specifically why it's not being renewed this time, given that it has been renewed in the past. We'd recommend that you always have a meeting with the employee in this kind of scenario, so that letter could also invite the employee to come along and talk about it with you. And as I say, it's really important to explain to them the reason why the fixed term contract is not being renewed, and also then, you know, identify which of the potentially fair reasons which are available to an employer under legislation are you relying upon to say that that's why it's got to come to an end. I think it would also be useful to set out to the employee what steps you've previously taken or looked at to see if there's any alternatives. There are specific duties that you'll need to discharge about informing employees who you have on fixed term contracts about permanent vacancies that might be available, and also generally thinking about what other alternatives there are to non-renewing of this contract. I've been advising a client this week on a similar scenario, and the fixed term contract was for, I think, 30 hours a week, but all they could offer was an alternative on 15 hours a week. But it was an alternative, and it was something that they wanted to discuss with the employee. So it's always about looking at what alternatives can you think about, can you discuss, rather than just ending the contract. And in this scenario, we would also offer a right of appeal. So those are just some things in terms of what fair procedure you would need to follow. As I mentioned, it's worth noting that a fixed term employee does have a freestanding right to be informed of any permanent vacancies at the place in which they work. They really should appear in an advertisement, and then the employee themselves should have a reasonable opportunity of reading that during their employment. Or if that's not the case, they should be given notice of it in some other way. And the last thing I think just to pick up on about this is that if it's to do with tightening budgets, or, you know, it could be wider than that, it could be to do with a particular project ending, it can be a redundancy situation as well. You know, we have a very clear definition of redundancy in legislation, which basically talks about 3 different types of situations. We've got business closure, workplace closure, and then reduction of workforce. In this scenario, it doesn't seem like it's going to be one of the first two, but it could well be that there is sort of a diminution or a ceasing of the work of that particular kind that the employee is employed to do. And that could well meet the definition of redundancy. So I think in these scenarios, it's a fine line sometimes between deciding whether the reason for the dismissal is some other substantial reason, i.e. a particular project has come to an end, or a particular stream of funding is no longer available, or is it redundancy? And actually, could it be both potentially? And if there's a potential that it's both, you might want to proceed with caution and treat it as a redundancy situation, because there is less work of a particular kind for that person to do. If that's the case, then you're going to have to make sure you go through a fair process from a redundancy point of view. So that will be looking at suitable alternative employment, making sure that you've done the correct consultation, thinking about the pools for redundancy, and ticking off those boxes as well, you know, just from that point of view. So quite a lot to think about. And I know I said that was the last point. There is one more point actually that I would just say is that employees who have been continuously employed on fixed term contracts for 4 years or more, if there are a succession of them, then automatically they would be deemed to become a permanent employee after that time, unless you can justify the continued use of a fixed term contract. So they do raise quite a lot of issues. Like I say, you have to think about, we're now in the scenario of, has this person got 2 years service? Well, then we need to think about this from an unfair dismissal point of view. potentially a redundancy point of view, and if you've got 4 years, do we also need to think about have they become a permanent employee at this point? So quite a lot to go at with that one, but hopefully that has answered the question. And we will happily hand over to a colleague now. We've had a question come in, which is, how should we deal with a complaint made on social media by a parent? So Sam, I think that's one for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. So, yes, in the present world, parents can communicate and vocalize issues in many different ways, whether that's via social media platforms, whether that's via parent WhatsApp groups or year group WhatsApp groups. Unhelpful comments and opinions can be expressed, which can cause damage or reputation to the school. And sometimes it can even go beyond that. And there can be posts on social media which target an individual staff member or an individual pupil. So in order to mitigate any negative comments or complaints on social media that could be seen by a wide range of people, it is best to send regular letters out to parents, simply reminding them of their obligations when posting on social media to post responsibly, coupled with a reminder of the school's complaints policy. Now, this preventative measure should hopefully prevent people from posting on social media. However, I have known organisations to promote social media positively and have their own Facebook groups and invite parents to join. So the benefit of this is that feedback can be managed all in one group, and you'll be able to see everything that's being said about the school, provided the group works as it should. Now, if there's been a particular instance and a particular complaint that you want to address, then it would be best practice to raise it with the parent who's made a complaint directly and bring them in. A lot of times, parents simply might not think about the impact that their posts have and also the reach that they have. And bringing them in will allow you to understand their issue. And it also allows you to remind them of the complaints policy and let them know that any complaint that they have should be made in accordance with the policy. And hopefully that can resolve the matter. Now, if the particular complaint has been made by the parent has targeted a staff member or has even targeted another student, then of course it would be best practice at this stage to offer additional support to the member of staff or the student. Having said that, you could bring the parents in, and the person carrying out this conduct, the person making these complaints, may not listen to reason. Now, at this stage, there are multiple steps you can take. First of all, you'd see whether what they're posting on social media is a violation of that social media site's policy. So, for example, if it violates Facebook policy, if it's harassment, or if it's inappropriate, then you can report them to that social media platform and they will have the post removed. Alternatively, if the posts are tantamount to harassment of a particular individual, it could potentially be worth reporting them to the police and seeing what action the police will take. Now, if this course of action doesn't lead to anywhere and the complaints or the harassment is still ongoing, then at that stage, it may be best to seek legal advice about what your options are. It may well be that what they're carrying out in terms of the complaint and the severity of it amounts to defamation. Now, defamation, when it's written down on social media, is libel, and there is injunctive action that you can take with regards to libel. And this can be whether or not it's an expression of opinion or an expression of fact. It will depend on what the parent is saying. Now, court proceedings for injunctions for matters such as this are very expensive. However, sometimes a cease and desist letter from a solicitor could do the trick and could get them to stop. Or alternatively, it may well embolden them. It may well rile them up even more. There's always you've got to measure out how to respond to this once it gets to this stage, and that's why we'd suggest at this stage you would seek legal advice. So if there are any particular complaints that you need assistance with addressing, we're of course happy to help, but that would be how I'd deal with complaints in the first instance.
Great, thank you, Sam. That's really helpful. I know it's a tricky area for schools to navigate. We've had just a follow-up question, I think, from what I was talking about with the fixed-term contract. So I'll just deal with that, which was, what about agency staff that have been continuously working for 2 or 3 years in the same place? So I think the first thing we'd have to look at is the status of the person who is apparently working under the agency. If they are genuinely somebody who has been employed by an agent and then have been placed at the school on an assignment, so they're not employed by the school, then really it shouldn't be a problem about ending that contract, even if it's been 2 or 3 years. There should be a contractual arrangement in place between the school and the agency who have provided the individual. I think, though, given the length of time we're talking about, we would probably want to look into that a bit further and just see whether or not there has been any chance that that person, despite the arrangement that was set out at the start, has actually become a worker or an employee of the school directly, or the institution, whoever is the employer in that case, because it can sometimes be that actually, you know, things change and the contractual documents at the start don't really reflect what happens in reality. And if that person has been going in every day and is under the management of the school, you know, acts as if all the other employees do, is under the same level of control, can't send a substitute, for example, there's a number of things that we'd have to look at to see actually has this person become your own worker or employee, because tribunals ultimately want to know what's going on in reality. And it's very helpful to have contractual documentation that sets out what you want the situation to be. But unfortunately, it's not the be all and end all. And the tribunal would potentially look further than that if for some reason the individual was saying, no, I think I'm your employee or your worker. And if they were your own worker or employee, especially if it was the latter and it has been 2 or 3 years, then potentially you would need to take advice on whether or not, you know, you have to then follow the other things, the tips that I was saying, and whether the person potentially has rights that you need to know about. Because not only would it be about ending the potential contract, but if at that point you receive advice that suggests they potentially have become your own member of staff, there might be other rights that they've accrued during that time that you didn't necessarily know about, you know, then including holiday pay and other tricky areas to navigate. So that's worst case scenario, though. There is a good chance that actually if everything is in place and it works as an agency relationship should do, then there shouldn't be that direct relationship, and you should be able to terminate that relationship and stop the agency working for you if you don't need them any longer without too much trouble. Okay, so I think that's answered that. So yeah, the follow-up question is, are the T's and C's from the agency enough as documents? They're a very good starting point. I can't say with certainty without knowing, you know, what they say and knowing what happens in reality. But as long as what's happening in reality does reflect what's in those documents, then it's certainly a good place to start from and to proceed on the basis that everybody is working on the understanding that this person is not your employee or your worker. So yeah, hopefully that would be enough to get you off the ground, and certainly look at those and say that this is what we understand the situation to be. It's always worth reviewing them. If it's a period of this kind of, you know, 2 to 3 years, keep looking at those documents, check that they are fit for purpose, and have discussions with the people that you need to at the agency if you're unsure about anything. But hopefully the T's and C's would be enough. Okay, I think that's answered those questions. I'm just going to see if any colleagues want to add anything, just on any questions that have come up today or anything that they want to update people on the webinar on. Okay. I think that's everything then. So thank you very much for joining us today. This is going to be the last one of this academic year. We know you're all super busy, and there's lots going on in the last few weeks of term or months of term. So we look forward to seeing you all next academic year, and we'll have a date sent round and circulated with an invite for a Q&A in September. But obviously in the meantime, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask us, please feel free to get in touch with any of us. And thank you to my colleagues for joining us this morning.
Thank you.